Hey there, I'm Bronson, 29 years old, and I always knew I was different from my family, though I desperately tried to fit in. Last Thanksgiving, my sister Sarah finally said the words that had been hanging unspoken for years. You don't even belong in this family. What shattered me wasn't just her cruelty, but my parents' response. Sarah's right. We should have told you years ago. I left that night without argument, building a new life without them. Before I dive into this journey of rejection and unexpected redemption, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to redefine what family truly means. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Portland, with my parents Michael and Karen Wilson, and my sister Sarah, who's 3 years younger than me. Our house was comfortable, not luxurious, but we never wanted for anything. Dad worked as an accountant at a local firm, and Mom taught 3rd grade at the elementary school 2 miles from our house. On paper, we were the picture-perfect American family. But even from my earliest memories, something felt off. While Sarah inherited our parents' hazel eyes and sandy blonde hair, I stood out with darker features, brown eyes, and nearly black hair that curled in ways nobody else's in the family did. I was always taller with a completely different build than Dad's stocky frame. These physical differences wouldn't have mattered much if they weren't accompanied by other disconnects. Sarah and our parents shared passionate interests in sports, particularly baseball. Weekends meant the three of them huddled around the TV, cheering for the Portland Pickles while I'd quietly slip away to my room to read or work on computer projects. My attempts to join their enthusiasm felt forced, and they knew it. After a while, they stopped even inviting me to watch. Bronson's just wired differently. I'd hear Mom tell neighbors when they'd ask why I wasn't at the community baseball games where Sarah played shortstop. The phrase stung because it emphasized the separation, like I was some curious anomaly in their otherwise cohesive unit. School showcased our differences even more starkly. I gravitated toward science and mathematics, regularly bringing home straight A's and awards from academic competitions. Sarah struggled to maintain C's in most subjects, but excelled socially. She was voted class president 3 years running and dated the quarterback by sophomore year. What hurt most was the disparity in my parents' attention. They never missed a single one of Sarah's games or social events. Mom would spend hours helping her prepare for school dances, and Dad coached her baseball team despite his busy schedule. Meanwhile, when I won the state mathematics championship in junior year, neither of my parents attended the ceremony. Something came up at work, Dad explained briefly, though I later discovered it was because Sarah had a regular season game that same evening. The pattern continued year after year. When I was selected for a prestigious summer science program at MIT before senior year, Mom's response was a distracted 2PA, that's nice honey, while helping Sarah pick out her homecoming dress. I traveled across the country alone, while other students had proud parents dropping them off at the dorms. There was one incident that stands out from when I was 12. I came downstairs late one night to get a glass of water, and overheard my parents in serious conversation in the living room. We need to tell him someday, Mom was saying, her voice tight with worry. It's not fair to keep it from him forever. Dad sighed heavily. I know, but not yet. He's still so young. Maybe when he's 18. They immediately stopped talking when they noticed me in the doorway. I asked what they were discussing, and Dad quickly answered. Just some boring adult stuff, Bronson. Nothing for you to worry about. I went back to bed confused and unsettled, but I pushed the conversation to the back of my mind, telling myself it was probably about something mundane like finances. Still, a seed of doubt had been planted. Despite these challenges, I held on to hope that things would improve as we all grew older. Maybe adulthood would bring a new understanding between us. Maybe once we were all independent, the playing field would somehow level out. That hope, thin as it was, kept me going through the increasingly lonely years of high school, where the gap between me and my family only seemed to widen with each passing month. When acceptance letters arrived during my senior year, I received offers from several prestigious universities. Though part of me had fantasized that academic achievement might finally win my parents' wholehearted approval, their reaction to my full scholarship to State University, 220 miles away, was lukewarm at best. That's quite far, Mom commented, her tone suggesting concern, but her eyes not meeting mine. Are you sure you want to be so far from home? The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of emotional distance, they suddenly seemed bothered by physical distance. Dad simply nodded and said, "Well, it's a good school, and a scholarship is nothing to sneeze at." Moving day was telling. While other parents helped their children set up dorm rooms with tearful goodbyes and countless photos, my parents dropped me off with minimal ceremony. "We need to get back to help Sarah with her college applications," Dad explained, though Sarah was only beginning her sophomore year of high school. That first day alone in my dorm, watching other families through my window as they laughed and hugged, I felt a profound emptiness. But that feeling didn't last long. My roommate Jason changed everything. Within hours of meeting, we discovered shared interests in computer programming, science fiction novels, and obscure indie bands that nobody else seemed to know about. For the first time, I didn't have to pretend to be interested in something. I could simply be myself. "Dude, you're like the brother I never had," Jason told me after our first week together, as we sat coding late into the night. The casual comment nearly brought me to tears. The sense of connection I'd craved my entire life was suddenly available, not from my biological family, but from this stranger who'd become my friend. Our circle expanded. Elena from computer science, Marcus from the robotics club, and Aiden from our dormitory formed a tight-knit group that spent weekends working on tech projects, hiking in nearby state parks, and having heated debates about everything from artificial intelligence ethics to the best pizza toppings. With them, I never felt like the odd one out. "You're the smartest person I know," Elena told me once when I helped her debug a particularly challenging program. "Your brain works in the most fascinating way." These words of appreciation, so freely given by my friends, yet so absent in my family experience, were healing. For the first time, my differences weren't deficiencies, but strengths. My analytical thinking, my curiosity, my persistence, all were valued. As college progressed, communication with my family dwindled further. I'd call home every Sunday during freshman year, but these conversations grew increasingly short and superficial. Mom would ask basic questions about classes. Dad would offer generic encouragement about keeping my grades up, and Sarah, when she bothered to come to the phone at all, would rush through pleasantries before claiming she had plans with friends. By junior year, these calls had reduced to once a month, then mainly on holidays and birthdays. I stopped going home for shorter breaks, finding more comfort in staying with Jason's family, who welcomed me warmly into their Thanksgiving and Easter celebrations. "Our home is your home," Jason's mother would insist, setting an extra place at the table like it was the most natural thing in the world. The contrast with my own family's lukewarm inclusion was stark. I threw myself into academics and extracurricular projects, graduating summa cum laude with a degree in computer engineering. The ceremony was bittersweet. My parents and Sarah attended but left immediately after to beat traffic, missing the department reception, where I received an additional award for outstanding achievement. "Congratulations," Dad said briefly with an awkward pat on my shoulder. Mom gave me a quick hug. Sarah barely looked up from her phone. Jason's family, in contrast, took dozens of photos, presented me with a thoughtful gift, and insisted on taking me and my friends out to a celebration dinner. The division couldn't have been clearer. These people who had known me for 4 years showed more genuine pride in my accomplishments than the family who had raised me. After graduation, I accepted a position with a growing tech firm in Boston. The distance from Portland now stretched to nearly 3,000 miles, and strangely, that felt right. I found a comfortable apartment, made new friends through work and local tech meetups, and began building a life that felt authentic to who I was. I maintained obligatory contact with my family. Calls on major holidays, the occasional email update about my job, electronic gift cards sent for birthdays. Each year, I'd make the cross-country flight for Christmas, spending an awkward few days navigating the emotional minefield of a house that no longer felt like home if it ever truly had. During these visits, I couldn't help noticing how Sarah struggled to find direction. She dropped out of community college after one semester, cycled through a series of retail jobs, and still lived at home at 26. Despite this, my parents remained her greatest champions, making excuses for her lack of ambition and celebrating her smallest achievements while minimizing mine. "Not everyone is built for the academic track," Mom would say defensively whenever the subject of Sarah's career came up. "She's finding her path." Meanwhile, my promotions and professional successes were acknowledged with brief congratulations, before the conversation shifted back to Sarah's latest interest or drama. The imbalance was painfully obvious, but I'd grown accustomed to it, building emotional armor that protected me from expecting anything more. 3 years passed this way, me in Boston advancing in my career, and building meaningful friendships with increasingly perfunctory connections to my family in Portland. I'd found a kind of peace in this arrangement, lowering my expectations to match the reality of our relationship. But I had no idea that even this tenuous balance was about to shatter completely. 3 years ago, I flew home for Thanksgiving, expecting the usual polite small talk, watching football games I didn't care about, and counting the hours until I could return to Boston. The weather in Portland matched my mood, gray and drizzling with a biting November chill that seemed to seep through my jacket as I waited for Dad to pick me up at the airport. He was 20 minutes late. Sorry, he said as I climbed into the car, not quite making eye contact. Sarah needed a ride to pick up her contribution to dinner. No explanation of what that contribution was or why it couldn't have waited. Just another small reminder of where priorities lay in the Wilson family. Mom greeted me with a distracted hug at the door, immediately returning to her cooking. The house smelled like it always did on Thanksgiving, roasting turkey, sage stuffing, and pumpkin pie, but lacked the warmth these scents should have evoked. Sarah arrived an hour later, bringing a store-bought pie that Mom praised as though she'd crafted it from scratch. Dinner started tensely. Dad carved the turkey while Mom fussed over Sarah's plate, making sure she got her favorite pieces. I helped myself, quietly used to navigating these subtle hierarchies. The conversation revolved around local gossip, about people I barely remembered, and Sarah's latest job at a downtown boutique. "They're talking about making me assistant manager," she announced, though she'd only been there for 3 weeks. "The owner says I have natural leadership abilities." "That's wonderful, honey," Mom beamed, refilling Sarah's wineglass for the 3rd time. "We always knew you'd find your calling." I nodded politely, taking a sip of my own wine. The familiar ache of invisibility settled in my chest, but I pushed it away. I was 29 years old, too mature, to still be craving parental approval that had never been forthcoming. When there was finally a lull in the Sarah-centric conversation, I decided to share my own news. "I got a promotion last month," I said, keeping my tone casual. "I'm heading up a new development team for our cybersecurity division." Dad nodded vaguely. "Good for you, son." Mom added, "That sounds complicated. Is it a lot of pressure?" Before I could answer, Sarah snorted, the sound sharp and dismissive. The wine had clearly gone to her head, her cheeks flushed and eyes overly bright. "Of course Bronson got promoted," she said, her words slightly slurred. "Perfect Bronson, with his perfect brain and his perfect job. Meanwhile, the rest of us normal people struggle along." Sarah, Mom cautioned, though there was little force behind it. "What?" Sarah shot back, swirling her wine dramatically. "It's not like he needs our validation. He's always been different. Always been. Separate." I set my fork down slowly. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Sarah leaned forward, something challenging and almost cruel in her expression. "You know exactly what I mean. You've never been like us. You've never fit. You don't even look like any of us." The room fell silent. I looked from Sarah to my parents, expecting them to intercede to shut down this inappropriate line of conversation. Instead, they exchanged a loaded glance that sent a chill through me. "You don't even belong in this family anyway." Sarah finally said, the words hanging in the air like poison. The silence that followed was deafening. I waited for Mom or Dad to contradict her, to scold her for such a hurtful statement. Instead, Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably and looked down at his plate. "Sarah's right," he said quietly. "We should have told you years ago." I felt as though the floor had disappeared beneath me. Told me what? My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Hollow, distant. Mom's eyes filled with tears. "You're adopted, Bronson. We adopted you when you were just 6 weeks old." 29 years. For 29 years they had kept this fundamental truth about my identity from me. Suddenly, so many pieces clicked into place. The physical differences, the emotional distance, the preferential treatment of Sarah. It was a closed adoption. Dad continued, his voice clinical, as though discussing a business transaction. "We don't know much about your birth parents. The agency said your birth mother was very young, unable to care for a child. There was no information about the father." I sat perfectly still, trying to absorb the shock while maintaining some semblance of composure. And you never thought this was something I deserved to know. For nearly 3 decades, Mom dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. We meant to tell you when you were younger, but there never seemed to be a right time. Then, as you got older, it became harder. We were afraid it would hurt you, Dad added weakly. Sarah, emboldened rather than sobered by the revelation, leaned forward again. See, you literally aren't one of us. You don't have our blood. You don't have our DNA. You're not a real Wilson. Sarah, that's enough, Dad said half-heartedly. What? It's true, she persisted, her voice rising. I've had to share everything with him my whole life. Your attention, your resources, and he's not even your real kid. He's a stranger you picked up from some agency. Each word was like a knife, confirming every insecurity I'd ever felt. The worst part wasn't learning I was adopted. It was realizing that my sister, possibly my parents, too considered me an interloper. Someone who didn't belong. Someone less than. Were you ever going to tell me? I asked quietly, looking directly at my parents. Or were you planning to take this secret to your graves? Mom looked away, unable to meet my eyes. Dad sighed heavily. We discussed it many times over the years. But after a while, it just seemed easier to maintain the status quo. Easier for whom, I asked, though I already knew the answer. Easier for them. My right to know my own identity had been secondary to their comfort. It doesn't change anything, Mom said desperately. We're still your parents. We still raised you, loved you. Loved me. The word felt hollow. Is that what you call this? Lying to me for my entire life? Making me feel like an outsider? Without ever explaining why? Consistently prioritizing Sarah, while treating me like an afterthought. That's not fair, Dad protested weakly. No, I agreed, surprising myself with how calm I sounded despite the hurricane inside me. None of this is fair. Sarah, who should have been subdued by the gravity of the moment, instead pressed on. You always acted so superior with your grades and awards, like you were better than me, but now everyone knows the truth. You're nobody, just some random kid my parents felt sorry for. In that moment, looking at my sister's spite-filled face and my parents' guilty expressions, something crystallized within me. These people might have raised me, but they had never truly accepted me as their own. And now, after 29 years of conditional inclusion, I finally understood why. The dining room felt suddenly airless, as though all the oxygen had been sucked out by Sarah's vicious words and my parents' shocking revelation. I could have responded with anger, shouting accusations, the breaking of dishes. A part of me certainly wanted to, but something deeper, something more dignified took hold instead. I see, I said, simply folding my napkin and placing it beside my half-eaten plate of turkey and stuffing. Thank you for finally telling me the truth. Bronson, Mom began, her voice pleading, but I raised my hand to stop her. I need some time to process this. I continued, my voice steady, despite the earthquake happening inside me. I think it's best if I leave now. Don't be dramatic. Sarah slurred, still emboldened by wine, and the twisted victory she seemed to feel. It's Thanksgiving. I looked at her. Really looked at her. Perhaps for the first time seeing clearly the jealousy and insecurity that fueled her cruelty. Yes, it is. And I'm thankful to finally understand why I've never truly felt like I belonged here. I stood up, pushed in my chair, and walked calmly upstairs to the guest room, where my suitcase sat barely unpacked. I gathered my belongings, methodically, hearing the murmur of heated conversation downstairs, but unable to distinguish words through the ringing in my ears. 20 minutes later, I descended with my bag. My parents had moved to the living room, sitting tensely on the edge of the couch. Sarah was nowhere to be seen, probably retreated to her old bedroom to avoid the fallout of her actions. You don't have to leave, Dad said, unconvincingly. We can talk about this. We've had 29 years to talk about it, I replied. You chose not to. I need space now. Where will you go, Mom? Asked, tears streaming down her face. Your flight isn't until Sunday. I'll find a hotel near the airport and see if I can change my booking. I moved toward the door, surprised by my own composure when everything inside me was chaos. Son, Dad started. Am I? I asked quietly. Your son, I mean, because it doesn't feel like I ever truly was. I didn't wait for an answer. I thanked them for dinner, wished them a happy Thanksgiving, and walked out the front door into the cold November rain. I called a rideshare from the end of the driveway, and within minutes was heading toward a hotel I'd hastily booked on my phone. The next morning, I was on a flight back to Boston, having paid the change fee, without hesitation. The extra expense was nothing compared to the need to escape to put physical distance between myself and the family that had just confirmed my lifelong suspicion of not belonging. The next few weeks passed in a blur of emotional processing. I took time off work, explaining vaguely that I was dealing with a family crisis. In the solitude of my apartment, I allowed myself to feel everything I'd suppressed during that fateful dinner: rage, grief, betrayal, loss. My phone filled with voicemails and texts from my parents, their messages evolving from defensive justifications. "We thought we were protecting you," to desperate pleas. "Please talk to us. We're still your family." Sarah remained conspicuously silent. No apology, no acknowledgement of her role in the revelation. I couldn't bring myself to respond to any of them. Each attempted contact only underscored the decades of deception. Each message, claiming familial love, felt hollow against the backdrop of 29 years of conditional acceptance. After 2 weeks of isolation, I realized I needed help processing this seismic shift in my identity. I found a therapist who specialized in adoption issues and adult family trauma. Dr. Melissa Bennett's gentle but direct approach helped me navigate the complex emotions swirling through me. "What you're experiencing is a double trauma," she explained during our third session. "There's the adoption revelation itself, which fundamentally changes how you understand your identity, and then there's the betrayal trauma of having this information withheld from you for so long. I don't even know who I am anymore." I admitted the words painful to voice aloud. "You're still Bronson," she replied firmly. "Your experiences, your values, your accomplishments, those are all real and valid. Being adopted doesn't negate the person you've become." Over the following months, therapy became my lifeline. With Dr. Bennett's guidance, I explored not just the pain of my family's deception, but also questions about my biological origins. Who were my birth parents? Did I have biological siblings somewhere? Did I inherit my analytical mind and love for technology from them? Many adoptees experience what we call genealogical bewilderment, Dr. Bennett explained. It's the confusion and struggle that comes from not knowing your biological roots. Would you be interested in exploring your origins? The question gave me pause. Part of me feared further rejection. What if my birth parents wanted nothing to do with me? But another part yearned for connection with people who might actually share my traits, my appearance, my way of seeing the world. In January, I ordered a DNA testing kit from one of the popular genealogy services. Spitting into the small tube felt like casting a message in a bottle into a vast ocean, a desperate reach for connection with unknown shores. While waiting for results, I focused on strengthening relationships with the people who had chosen to care about me. Jason flew out from Chicago, where he'd settled after college, staying with me for a long weekend of reminiscing and heartfelt conversations. "Blood doesn't make family," he told me earnestly, as we shared beers on my small balcony overlooking the Boston skyline. "Look at us. We're closer than most brothers I know, and there's not a drop of shared DNA between us." My Boston friends rallied around me too. Elena organized dinner gatherings where I was surrounded by warmth and genuine affection. Marcus invited me to join his family's weekly Sunday brunches. Aiden and his partner included me in their weekend hiking trips, the physical exertion in Massachusetts' beautiful state parks providing a welcome relief from my emotional turmoil. 6 weeks after submitting my DNA sample, the results arrived. With trembling fingers, I opened the email notification. The test had identified several second and third cousins, distant relations, but connections nonetheless. More importantly, I discovered that my genetic heritage was primarily Eastern European with some Mediterranean influences, nothing like the predominantly Northern European background of the Wilson family. Armed with this information, and with Dr. Bennett's encouragement, I reached out to a search specialist who helped adoptees locate their biological families. The process was slow, complicated by the closed nature of my adoption, but after months of careful investigation, we identified a potential match. A woman named Nadia Kozlov, who had given birth at the right time and place and whose family tree aligned with my DNA matches. The first email contact was terrifying to initiate. I crafted and deleted dozens of versions before sending a simple, honest message, explaining who I was and why I was reaching out. 3 agonizing days later, I received a response that changed everything. I have thought about you every single day for 29 years. Not a birthday has passed when I haven't wondered how you were doing. I was 18 when I had you, too young, too poor, with no support system. Giving you up was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I prayed you would find a loving family. I would very much like to know you if you're willing. Attached was a photo of a woman with my eyes, my curly dark hair, my dimpled smile. Looking at her face was like finding a piece of myself I never knew was missing. We arranged a video call, and the immediate connection was undeniable. She was a software engineer, my analytical mind finally explained. She shared my love of science fiction, my preference for mountains over beaches, even my habit of solving puzzles to relax. Through Nadia, I eventually connected with a half-brother and half-sister from her later marriage. Both displayed the same intellectual curiosity that had always made me an outlier in the Wilson household. For the first time, I experienced what it meant to be with people who were intrinsically like me. Meanwhile, my relationship with the Wilsons remained in limbo. I'd eventually responded to my parents with a brief email explaining that I needed time and space. I asked them to respect my boundaries until I was ready to talk, if that day ever came. They agreed, though. Sporadic messages still appeared on holidays and birthdays. Sarah never reached out at all. Her silence spoke volumes about the true nature of our relationship, or lack thereof. Through mutual acquaintances from Portland, I heard she was still living at home, still struggling professionally, still depending on our parents for financial and emotional support. By the 1-year anniversary of the Thanksgiving revelation, I had built something precious, a chosen family of friends who loved me for exactly who I was, and the beginnings of relationships with biological relatives who shared my traits and tendencies. I had also built professional success, receiving another promotion that put me in charge of a major security implementation for a Fortune 500 client. I was healing, finding my footing in this new reality, where I understood both why I had always felt different, and that being different wasn't a deficiency. I thought I had made peace with the Wilson chapter of my life, being effectively closed. Then came the summer vacation that would unexpectedly reopen everything. June arrived with unusually warm weather in Boston. I had settled into a comfortable routine, challenging work during the week, social activities with friends on weekends, regular video calls with Nadia and my half-siblings, and ongoing sessions with Dr. Bennett to continue processing my adoption journey. I felt more centered than I had in years, secure in my identity and surrounded by genuine connections. Then one evening, while scrolling through social media before bed, a habit I was trying unsuccessfully to break, I saw a series of photos posted by Sarah. Family vacation time. Blessed Family First Luxury Cruise, read the caption. Beneath images of my parents and Sarah boarding a massive cruise ship. They wore matching tropical shirts, beaming at the camera with cocktails in hand. I stared at the photos, feeling a complex mix of emotions. There was hurt, certainly. This was clearly a family trip to which I hadn't been invited. But there was also a strange sense of confirmation. This visual evidence of my exclusion only validated my decision to distance myself from people who had never truly included me in the first place. The cruise appeared to be elaborate. A 2-week journey through the Caribbean, with stops at exclusive islands. Further posts showed Sarah lounging on pristine beaches, my parents smiling at formal dinners, and endless ocean views from a private balcony. The ostentatiousness of it all seemed almost deliberately hurtful, as if Sarah was showcasing the perfect family unit now unencumbered by the adopted outsider. "How are you feeling about seeing those posts?" Dr. Bennett asked during our next session. "Oddly at peace," I answered after careful reflection. "It's like the final confirmation that I've been making the right choice by building my life elsewhere." "That's a healthy perspective," she affirmed. "You're accepting reality rather than clinging to fantasies about what your relationship with them could or should be." I focused on my own summer plans: a weekend camping trip with friends, a professional conference in Seattle, and an upcoming visit from Nadia. My life was full and meaningful, without the Wilsons' conditional inclusion. Then 11 days into their 14-day cruise, my phone exploded with notifications. 15 missed calls from Sarah in the span of 2 hours. 6 voicemails, each more frantic than the last. Dozens of text messages that evolved from demanding to desperately pleading. I almost ignored them completely. After nearly 2 years of silence from her, no apology, no acknowledgement of her cruel words that Thanksgiving, her sudden urgent need for contact seemed suspect at best. But something in the escalating panic of her voicemails gave me pause. Bronson, call me back immediately. The first message began imperiously. It's an emergency. By the 6th message, her voice had cracked with what sounded like genuine fear. Please, Bronson. I know I don't deserve your help, but Mom and Dad are going to kill me. I really messed up. We're stranded. Please call back. Curiosity and a lingering sense of obligation finally won out. I returned her call around midnight, bracing myself for whatever manipulation might be coming. Thank God. Sarah answered immediately, her voice thick with what sounded like tears. I thought you'd never call back. What's going on, Sarah? I kept my tone-neutral protective walls firmly in place. What followed was a confession so breathtaking in its recklessness that I initially thought she must be exaggerating. According to Sarah, she had developed a gambling problem over the past year, something our parents had been helping her manage financially. On the cruise, she had convinced them to let her access their emergency credit card just for souvenirs. Instead, she had spent hours in the ship's casino, ultimately losing $75,000, nearly their entire retirement fund, which Dad had recently moved to a more accessible account for an upcoming property purchase. They trusted me, she sobbed. They thought I was better. But once I started playing, I couldn't stop. I kept thinking I could win it back. Where are Mom and Dad now? I asked, struggling to process the magnitude of her actions. They're in a cheap hotel in Miami. The cruise line let us disembark early after Dad made a scene when he found out. Her voice dropped to a whisper. They had to cancel the final days of the cruise because they can't access any more funds. All the cards are maxed out or frozen. We don't even have enough to change our flights to get home early. I sat in stunned silence, trying to absorb what she was telling me. The parents who had always protected Sarah, always prioritized her, had now been devastated by the very person they had favored. Why are you calling me? I finally asked, though I already knew the answer. We need help, Sarah admitted, her voice small and shamed. $15,000 to cover emergency flights home, the hotel, until we can fly out, and enough to tide them over until they can sort out the financial mess I've created. I know it's a lot, but you're the only person I know who might have that kind of money available. The irony was almost too perfect. The golden child running to the outcasted adopted son for financial rescue. The sister who had declared, I didn't belong in the family, now desperately needed what I could provide. Have you apologized to them? I asked, steering away from an immediate response to her request. Of course, she sniffled. I've been apologizing nonstop. They're barely speaking to me. And have you ever considered apologizing to me? The question slipped out before I could censor it. A raw, honest inquiry from the part of me that was still wounded by her Thanksgiving cruelty. The line went silent for several long moments. I know I should, she finally said. I was horrible to you. The things I said, they were unforgivable. I was jealous and drunk and horrible. Jealous, I repeated, genuinely surprised. Of what? Another pause. Everything. Your intelligence, your independence, the way you've always seemed so complete. I've never felt that way. I've always felt like I was competing with a standard I couldn't reach. It was perhaps the most honest conversation we'd ever had. While her timing was suspect, confession coming only when she needed financial help, there seemed to be a genuine recognition of her past behavior. I'll think about it, I told her, unwilling to commit immediately. Text me the details of where you're staying. I need some time. After hanging up, I sat in my darkened apartment, turning over options in my mind. I could refuse outright. They were adults who had made their choices, both in how they had treated me for decades and in trusting Sarah with access to their finances despite her history of irresponsibility. I could send the money with no strings attached. a gesture that might feel momentarily satisfying as a display of my success and generosity despite their rejection. Or I could find a third path, one that addressed both the immediate crisis and the deeper family dysfunction that had culminated in this situation. I called Dr. Bennett's emergency line grateful when she answered despite the late hour. What would be the healthiest response here, I asked after explaining the situation. Part of me wants to help, because they are the people who raised me regardless of how imperfectly. Another part feels this isn't my problem to solve. There's no perfect answer, she replied thoughtfully. The question is what response aligns with your values and supports your healing rather than reopening old wounds. After our conversation, I knew what I needed to do. By morning I had a plan. I booked a flight to Miami departing that afternoon, arranged for emergency time off work, and transferred funds to cover what would likely be needed. But unlike Sarah's request for a simple wire transfer, I was going to deliver the help in person. This is your chance to engage from a position of strength and clarity, Dr. Bennett had advised during our late-night call. Not to punish or seek revenge, but to establish healthy boundaries while still offering compassion. The flight gave me time to prepare mentally. I reviewed the notes from months of therapy sessions, reminding myself of how far I'd come in processing my adoption, in the decades of feeling like an outsider, and the painful Thanksgiving revelation. I wasn't flying to Miami as the rejected, wounded adoptee, but as a secure adult choosing to help despite past hurts, with conditions that would protect my well-being. I landed in Miami as evening approached, the air thick with humidity, as I took a taxi to the budget motel where my family was stranded. It was a stark contrast to the luxury cruise they'd been enjoying just days earlier. A single-story roadside establishment with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign. Room 23. I stood outside the door for a long moment, centering myself before knocking firmly. Mom opened the door, her appearance shocking me momentarily. She had aged years in the 18 months since I'd last seen her. Her hair showed more gray, deep lines etched around her eyes, and mouth, her posture slightly stooped, as though under an invisible weight. Bronson, she gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. What are you? She was interrupted by Dad's voice from inside. Who is it, Karen? It's Bronson, she called back, still staring at me in disbelief. I heard movement, and then Dad appeared beside her. His expression, a complex mixture of shame, surprise, and what looked like tentative hope. Behind them I caught a glimpse of Sarah sitting on one of the room's 2 queen beds, her face blotchy from crying. May I come in? I asked quietly. They stepped aside wordlessly, and I entered the small, over-air-conditioned room that smelled faintly of mildew. The tension was palpable, not just regarding my unexpected appearance, but between the three of them. The easy Wilson family unit showcased in Sarah's cruise photos had clearly fractured under the weight of her betrayal. Sarah called me, I said, breaking the uncomfortable silence. She explained the situation. Dad's jaw tightened. She had no right to drag you into this mess. We'll figure it out ourselves. How exactly? I asked, not unkindly. From what I understand, you're essentially stranded with no access to funds. We would have found a way, Mom insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. I set my overnight bag down and pulled out the chair from a small desk in the corner, taking a seat. I'm here to help, I said directly. But we need to talk first. Really talk in a way we never have before. Sarah finally spoke, her voice small. You came all this way just to talk. I came to offer assistance, I corrected her, but not unconditionally. Something in my tone must have conveyed my seriousness, because all three of them settled onto the beds facing me like students awaiting a lecture. The role reversal was striking, me in the position of authority, them waiting to hear my terms. For 29 years, I began, my voice steady. I lived with the feeling that I didn't quite belong in our family. I didn't understand why there was always a distance, why Sarah was consistently prioritized, why my accomplishments were acknowledged, but never truly celebrated. Now I know it was because you never fully accepted me as your son, in the way you accepted Sarah as your daughter. Mom started to protest, but I held up my hand. Please let me finish. I'm not saying this to hurt you, or to make you feel guilty. I'm saying it because we need to acknowledge reality if we're going to move forward. I turned to Sarah specifically. That Thanksgiving you said out loud what had been unspoken for decades, that I didn't belong. And while the delivery was cruel, there was truth in it. I was different. I did stand apart. And that was because of secrets kept and choices made long before I had any say in the matter. I paused, gathering my thoughts before continuing. I don't blame you for adopting me. That was an act of generosity, giving a home to a child who needed one. What I struggled with was the decision to hide my adoption from me, to expect me to somehow fit in without understanding why I felt different, and the consistent favoritism shown to Sarah throughout our lives. Dad looked down at his hands. We thought we were doing the right thing, he said quietly. We were advised back then that it was better for adopted children not to know, that it would make them feel more secure, more part of the family. But I never felt secure, I replied. I always felt conditional, like I had to earn my place through achievement, while Sarah's place was guaranteed through blood. Mom was crying silently, now tears streaming down her face. We never meant to make you feel that way. Intention and impact are different things, I said gently. And now we're here. A family fractured not just by the adoption revelation, but by decades of unequal treatment. And now by a major breach of trust. I glanced at Sarah, who had the grace to look ashamed. Here are my conditions for helping, I continued. First, $15,000 to cover your immediate needs. Emergency flights, home hotel costs, until then. And enough to tide you over while you sort out the financial situation. This is not a loan, it's a gift. I'm in a position to provide this without hardship to myself. They looked stunned at the directness of my offer. Second, Sarah needs to get professional help for her gambling addiction. This isn't a one-time mistake. It's a pattern of behavior that has now reached a catastrophic level. I'll help you research appropriate treatment programs when we get you home. Sarah nodded meekly, unable to meet my eyes. Third, if we're going to have any relationship moving forward, we need family therapy, together and separately. The dynamics between us are deeply damaged, and throwing money at the immediate crisis won't fix the underlying issues. Therapy, Dad repeated, sounding skeptical. All of us. All of us, I confirmed. This situation didn't happen in isolation. It's the result of family patterns that have existed for decades. And if we agree to these terms, Mom asked cautiously, then I help you get home. Help Sarah get treatment, and we begin the process of seeing if there's a healthier family relationship possible for us. I'm not promising forgiveness, or that things will ever be the way you might wish they were, but I'm offering a chance to build something new, something based on honesty and respect rather than secrets and unspoken expectations. The room fell silent as they processed my words. I watched emotions play across their faces, surprise at my composure, shame at the circumstances, and perhaps a dawning recognition of the mature, centered man I had become during our estrangement. Why would you help us at all? Sarah finally asked. After what I said to you, after how they kept the truth from you, why not just leave us here to deal with our own mess? It was the most insightful question she had ever asked me. I took a moment to find the right words. Because holding on to anger and resentment would only continue to hurt me. Because despite everything, you three are part of my story. And because I've learned that family isn't just about blood or legal documents, it's about choice. I'm choosing to offer help because it aligns with the person I want to be, not because of obligation. Dad's eyes glistened with what might have been tears, something I'd never seen from him before. We don't deserve your help, he said quietly. This isn't about deserving, I replied. It's about breaking cycles and creating the possibility for healing. Slowly, one by one, they agreed to my terms. The relief in the room was palpable, not just regarding the financial rescue, but perhaps at the chance to finally address the dysfunctions that had plagued our family for decades. That night, I used my credit card to book flights home for all of us for the following afternoon. We ate dinner together at a nearby diner, the conversation awkward but punctuated by moments of surprising honesty. I've always been jealous of you, Sarah admitted over dessert, speaking directly to me for perhaps the first time in years. You've always known who you are and what you wanted. I never have. I've spent most of my life feeling like I had to be perfect just to be acceptable, I responded. That's not something to be jealous of. We failed you both in different ways, Mom said softly. Sarah through overindulgence, Bronson through emotional distance. It wasn't a perfect conversation. Decades of dysfunction couldn't be resolved in a single evening, but it felt like the first truthful exchange we'd ever had as a family. As I returned to my separate room that night, I felt neither triumphant nor defeated, but cautiously hopeful that something transformative had begun, not just for them in their crisis, but for all of us in our long-damaged family system. The following months unfolded in ways I never could have anticipated when I boarded that flight to Miami. True to our agreement, Sarah enrolled in a comprehensive treatment program for gambling addiction immediately upon our return to Portland. I stayed for a week, helping my parents navigate the financial devastation her actions had caused and researching family therapists who specialized in adoption issues. It's going to take years to rebuild our retirement savings, Dad confessed as we sat reviewing their accounts. The vulnerability in his voice was new. Gone was the authoritative father figure who had always presented himself as having everything under control. One step at a time, I advised. The financial aspect is just one piece of what needs healing here. Before returning to Boston, I scheduled our first family therapy session with Dr. Amanda Watkins, a specialist recommended by my own therapist. That initial meeting was brutally honest. Tears, recriminations, defenses crumbling under the weight of truth, finally spoken aloud. What I'm hearing Dr. Watkins observed after nearly 2 hours of emotional exchange is a family system built on secrets, unspoken expectations, and deep insecurities on all sides. The good news is that you're all here willing to do this difficult work together. Over the following weeks, I participated in therapy sessions via video call while my parents and Sarah attended in person. We established a rhythm, joint family sessions, alternating with individual counseling for each of us. The process was painful, but necessary, peeling back layers of dysfunction that had been building for decades. Mom finally shared her deep insecurity about adopting, how she had feared I would never truly feel like her son, and how that fear had ironically created the emotional distance she dreaded. I was so afraid of losing you that I never fully let myself connect, she admitted during one particularly powerful session, her voice breaking. It was easier to focus on Sarah because that relationship felt safer. Dad revealed his own struggles with emotional expression, how his upbringing had taught him to value achievement over affection, and how he had projected those values onto me while giving Sarah the emotional nurturing he himself had never received. I saw myself in you, Bronson, he said. And instead of that creating closeness, I pushed you to be what I thought you needed to be, strong, independent, successful, without giving you what you actually needed from a father. Sarah's therapy journey was perhaps the most transformative. Through her addiction treatment and our family sessions, she confronted not just her gambling problem, but the deep-seated insecurities that had fueled her jealousy and cruelty toward me. I always felt like I was living in your shadow, she told me during a rare one-on-one conversation. You were so naturally good at everything important, and I felt average, ordinary. The only thing that made me special was being their biological child, so I clung to that because it was all I had that you didn't. 3 months into our therapy journey, I took another significant step, introducing my parents and Sarah to Nadia during a video call. The meeting was awkward initially, all parties uncertain of their roles in this complex family constellation. Thank you for giving Bronson a home, Nadia said to my parents, her accent still noticeable despite decades in America. I was too young, too alone to be the mother he deserved then. Thank you for giving us the gift of being his parents, Mom responded, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in years lighting her face, even if we made many mistakes along the way. 6 months after the cruise disaster, Sarah completed her intensive treatment program and began the harder work of maintaining sobriety from gambling while rebuilding her life. She moved into her own apartment for the first time at 29, took responsibility for a portion of the debt she had created, and found steady employment at a local marketing firm where her social skills became an asset rather than a distraction. I'm finally growing up, she told me during one of our now regular phone calls, only about a decade later than I should have. Better late than never, I replied, surprised to find myself developing what might eventually become a genuine friendship with the sister who had once declared I didn't belong in her family. My parents, meanwhile, adjusted to their new financial reality with unexpected grace. They downsized from the family home to a smaller condo, cut unnecessary expenses, and Dad took on consulting work to supplement his retirement income. The crisis that could have destroyed them, instead, seemed to spark a renewed partnership as they faced challenges together. As Christmas approached, our first holiday together since the Thanksgiving revelation 2 years prior, we collectively decided to create a new tradition. Rather than gathering in Portland or Boston, we chose neutral ground, a cabin, in the Colorado mountains, halfway between our respective homes. What made this gathering truly remarkable was the expanded guest list. Nadia flew in from California, bringing my half-siblings Elena and Marcus. Jason and his partner joined us from Chicago. The cabin became a living testament to the truth I had discovered through this painful journey, that family could be both born and chosen, both biological and created through love and commitment. Watching my adoptive parents and birth mother talking easily by the fireplace, seeing Sarah teaching my biological half-brother how to play her favorite card game, I felt a sense of wholeness I had never experienced before. "You've created something remarkable here," Jason observed, as we stood on the cabin's porch watching snow fall gently on the surrounding pines. "Most people would have walked away after what they did." "I almost did," I admitted. "But I'm learning that healing doesn't always look like what we expect. Sometimes it means creating something entirely new from the broken pieces." That night, as all 13 of us gathered around the dinner table, adoptive family, biological family, chosen family, all breaking bread together, Dad stood to offer a toast. "To Bronson," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "who taught us all what family truly means. Not blood, not legal documents, but choice. The daily choice to love, to forgive, to grow together even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult." I looked around at the faces surrounding me, some sharing my features, others connected by years of shared history, all united in the present moment, and felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been painful, the revelations devastating, but the outcome was a richer, more authentic life than I could have imagined when I walked away from that Thanksgiving table 2 years earlier. The truth that had once shattered me, "You don't belong in this family," had ultimately freed me to create a family constellation where I belonged completely, exactly as I was. Have you ever had to redefine what family means to you? Has rejection ever led you to something better than you could have imagined? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more journeys of healing and transformation. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes the family we create is more powerful than the one we're born or adopted into. The power to define your worth always rests with you, not with others' validation.